The known galaxy had precisely 847 recognized sapient species, and every single one of them agreed on exactly one universal truth: physical strength determined worth. Well, perhaps not the CYT thought clouds of Nebula Sector 7, but they didn't have hands, so their opinion on grip strength was admittedly limited. Station Epsilon 7 floated in neutral space, a monument to diplomatic excess and sporting violence. The station had been constructed by the Vor'kun Collective after the Third Trade War, specifically because everyone agreed that arguing over tariffs was boring. But watching representatives of different species try to physically demolish each other was premium entertainment. Democracy through destruction, they called it. The economists called it barbaric. The economists were also notably absent from the audience seating. The Krathani had dominated the interspecies martial tournaments for 6 consecutive cycles. This was unsurprising, considering they had evolved on a planet where gravity was 3 times galactic standard, their infants could bend steel railings, and their idea of a relaxing massage involved industrial hydraulic presses. They stood an average of 2.4 meters tall, possessed 4 arms, scales that could deflect most small-caliber projectiles, and an ego structure that could probably deflect criticism just as effectively. The current reigning champion, a Krathani warrior named Vexthar Krom, had won 47 consecutive matches. He had broken bones in species that didn't technically have bones. He had rendered unconscious beings whose neurological structures shouldn't have permitted unconsciousness. He was, by all measurable standards, an absolute unit of competitive violence, and he knew it with the kind of certainty usually reserved for mathematical constants. Tournament registration occurred in a massive hall that smelled faintly of ozone and fear. Representatives from across the local galactic arm had gathered: the crystalline, Shatterborn, who communicated through light refraction, the aquatic depressed in their mobility tanks, the 6-legged Arachnus delegates, who kept trying to build webs in the corner, and various other species, whose PR representatives insisted they were definitely not trying to intimidate anyone with their natural weaponry. And then there was the human. She stood approximately 1.7 meters tall, which in this crowd made her look like someone had brought their juvenile offspring to a professional death match. Her skin lacked scales, chitin, rock plating, or any other sensible biological armor. Her limbs numbered only 4 total, arranged in the disappointingly standard bilateral symmetry pattern. She possessed only 2 eyes, which several species present considered either minimalist or just plain lazy evolution. Her name was Keiko Reeves, and she was not supposed to be here. The registration clerk, a multi-tentacled Draxian, whose skin flickered through confused color patterns, examined her credentials for the 3rd time. The human was listed as part of Earth's Cultural Exchange Scientific Delegation, assigned to study Station Epsilon 7's waste recycling ecosystem. Somehow, through what appeared to be either bureaucratic error or the universe's sense of ironic humor, she had been automatically entered into the tournament roster. "You understand," the clerk said carefully, his translator rendering his concern into flat galactic standard, "that participation in these events carries significant physical risk. The liability waivers alone are 14 pages long." Keiko had the kind of face that suggested she had long ago made peace with the universe's stupidity. "I filled out the forms. I'm here. Might as well see it through. But you're a xenobotanist. And you're a registration clerk, yet here we are, both questioning our life choices." The clerk's tentacles sagged in what might have been respect or resignation. He stamped her entry credentials and handed her a participant badge that looked absurdly oversized on her frame. Across the registration hall, Vexthar Krom was holding court with a cluster of sports journalists whose recording equipment looked like it might achieve sentience out of sheer technological enthusiasm. The Krathani champion stood with all 4 arms crossed, his scales gleaming under the station's artificial lighting, looking like someone had carved a statue titled Intimidation Incarnate, and then given it an unnecessarily smug personality. "The competition this cycle appears particularly weak," he announced, his voice resonating through multiple vocal chambers. "I see nothing that will provide even momentary challenge. Perhaps I should request handicaps to make the tournaments interesting for the audience." One of the journalists, a floating orb creature, pulsed a question about the human entry. Vexthar's eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Keiko, who was attempting to figure out which refreshment dispenser wouldn't poison her biology. His laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. That? The bipedal softling? I have sparring partners in the juvenile training centers who would provide more resistance. Look at it. No natural weapons, no reinforced skeletal structure, probably mass less than my secondary arms. I will try not to accidentally crush it during the ceremonial greeting. The journalists ate this up, their recording equipment practically vibrating with glee. Nothing sold tournament packages like pre-match arrogance, followed by spectacular violence. What none of them knew, because xenobiology wasn't as entertaining as watching beings punch each other, was that Earth was a terrible planet. Not in the colloquial sense, although humans certainly had opinions about Monday mornings and tax season, but in the specific sense that it was a nightmare death world that had spent millions of years trying to kill everything on it. Earth had predators with night vision, venom, claws, and pack hunting. Intelligence. It had weather patterns that ranged from flash freeze to burning wasteland, often within the same geographical region. It had bacteria that could kill you, plants that could kill you, other humans that could definitely kill you, and evolution had responded to these challenges by creating persistence hunters who could throw objects with terrifying accuracy, track prey for days, and possessed a skeletal structure held together by the biological equivalent of high-tension cables. But this information was buried in scientific databases that serious warriors didn't read, because who had time for academic papers when there were opponents to intimidate? The tournament brackets were announced with ceremonial fanfare that involved light shows, booming announcements, and enough dramatic music to suggest someone had raided a movie composer's nightmares. Keiko found herself matched against a Torgash heavy worlder in the preliminary round, with the winner advancing to face Vexthar in the quarterfinals. The Torgash took one look at her, apologized in advance, and then apparently decided that mercy meant ending things quickly. The match lasted exactly 9 seconds. Keiko used a joint lock that a helpful drunk Marine had taught her in a Tokyo bar, and the Torgash spent the rest of the afternoon in medical getting his elbow reconstructed while questioning his understanding of physics. This result caused a minor stir in the betting pools, but most spectators attributed it to luck or the Torgash having an off day. Surely the human would be obliterated in the next round. The quarterfinal match was scheduled for the following cycle, giving participants time to rest, strategize, or in Vexthar's case, give more interviews about how effortlessly he would achieve victory. Keiko spent the interim period reading a fascinating paper on the station's hydroponic systems, and occasionally doing stretches that would have looked perfectly normal to any human, but appeared bizarrely contortionist to species, with more rigid skeletal structures. Match day arrived with appropriate ceremony. The arena floor was a circular platform 30 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers and audience seating that could accommodate approximately 12,000 spectators. Every seat was filled. Word had spread about the soft human advancing, and the crowd wanted to witness what they assumed would be an educational demonstration in the dangers of bureaucratic filing errors. Vexthar entered the arena to thunderous approval, all 4 arms raised in victory before the match had even begun. His scales had been polished to mirror brightness. His combat harness was decorated with tokens from previous victories. He looked like every sports highlight reel ever compiled had merged into a single being of pure competitive violence. Keiko entered from the opposite gate, wearing a simple athletic outfit that the arena's environmental systems had helpfully adjusted for her biological requirements. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong venue while searching for the academic lecture halls. The referee, a collective arbiter whose species had evolved past physical bodies, but maintained a holographic form for ceremonial purposes, materialized at the arena's center. Combatants will advance for the traditional greeting. This was the moment the crowd had been waiting for. The ceremonial greeting involved both fighters clasping hands or equivalent appendages, demonstrating mutual respect before trying to destroy each other. It was considered good sportsmanship, ancient tradition, and excellent footage for promotional materials. Vexthar approached with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by hitting it harder. Keiko walked forward with the expression of someone mentally calculating the structural engineering of the station's support beams. They met at the center. Vexthar extended his primary right arm, which was approximately the diameter of Keiko's entire torso. She reached up and placed her hand in his massive palm. His fingers closed around her hand in what he probably considered a gentle grip. To be fair, he wasn't trying to injure her yet. This was just the greeting. The actual violence came afterward. He felt her hand in his grip, the bones that felt like they might snap if he breathed wrong, the complete absence of protective scaling or chitin, the remarkable fragility of this bizarre species that somehow had achieved spaceflight despite being constructed from what appeared to be optimistic thoughts and prayer. "Weak," he announced, his voice amplified across the arena. "Like holding a bundle of dried vegetation. I will try to ensure your medical recovery is swift, human. This is a warrior's arena, not a place for soft scientists." The crowd laughed, a sound like avalanches occurring in multiple frequencies simultaneously. Keiko looked up at him with the kind of expression that suggested she had done the math and found his assumptions lacking. "You might want to revise that assessment." "Oh?" Vexthar's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Perhaps you would like to demonstrate your species' famous grip strength. I have heard tales that humans evolved as persistence hunters. Please, show me this legendary power." It was a taunt, obviously. An invitation for her to embarrass herself trying to squeeze his armored hand, to struggle pointlessly against his superior biology, to learn the hard lesson that the galaxy was a place of hierarchies and humans were nowhere near the top. Keiko smiled the kind of smile that should have come with warning labels. "Okay," she said simply. Her hand, still wrapped in his massive grip, suddenly contracted. Not the weak flutter he had expected, not the desperate squeeze of someone out of their depth, but a vice-like compression that sent pressure readings through his pain receptors like emergency alerts. Vexthar's expression shifted from amused condescension to confused surprise. The bones in his hand, reinforced through generations of high-gravity evolution, creaked audibly. His scales, designed to deflect blade strikes, provided exactly zero protection against the pressure being applied from inside his own grip. "What?" he began, but the sentence died as his hand went partially numb. "The thing about human evolution was this. When your ancestors spent millions of years throwing rocks at fast-moving prey, climbing trees while carrying things, and manipulating tools that determined survival, your species developed grip strength all out of proportion to body mass. Human hands could exert crushing force because they were, fundamentally, precision instruments designed to hold onto things that really didn't want to be held." Keiko wasn't even using her full strength. That would have been rude during the ceremonial greeting. She released his hand and stepped back. Vexthar flexed his fingers, feeling sensation return, his confidence notably reduced but his pride still very much intact. "A surprising trick," he acknowledged, his voice lacking its earlier mockery. "But grip strength alone will not save you when the actual combat begins." The referee signaled the start of the match. Vexthar had fought enough battles to recognize when to abandon showmanship for pragmatism. The human had surprised him once. It wouldn't happen again. He advanced with proper caution, forearms positioned for grappling, his center of gravity low and stable. Keiko moved into a stance that looked almost lazy, her weight distributed in a way that several Krythani martial analysts in the audience immediately flagged as biomechanically inefficient. They were correct, by Krythani standards. By human standards, she was positioned perfectly. Vexthar struck first, a testing grab aimed at her shoulder. She slipped the grip with minimal movement, her smaller size suddenly an advantage in close quarters. He pressed forward, all four arms working in coordination, attempting to use his mass advantage to overwhelm her position. This was the part where most opponents panicked. Vexthar in close combat was like being attacked by a landslide with tactical training. But Keiko didn't panic. She moved with the kind of economy that suggested she had learned fighting from people who couldn't afford wasted motion, redirecting his momentum rather than opposing it directly. They grappled, and the audience leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable moment when superior strength would crush inferior biology. It didn't come. Instead, something stranger happened. Keiko wasn't winning, exactly, but she wasn't losing either. She was adapting, reading his patterns, treating the fight like a puzzle that needed solving rather than a contest that needed dominating. Vexthar felt frustration building. He increased his aggression, using techniques that had shattered opponents, applying pressure that should have overwhelmed her skeletal structure. She bent, flexed, and somehow remained functional. Human joints, it turned out, had ridiculous ranges of motion compared to species that had evolved under higher gravity. Her shoulders could rotate nearly 360 degrees. Her spine could flex and twist in ways that looked like anatomical errors but were actually features. "Stop moving," Vexthar growled, and immediately realized how stupid that sounded. Keiko actually laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement. That's not how this works. She was enjoying this. The absolute lunatic was having fun. Vexthar decided to end the embarrassment. He committed to a full power grapple, all four arms coordinating to trap her in a hold that had won him 3 championship titles. He caught her, finally, his upper arms securing her shoulders while his lower arms controlled her hips. Victory was seconds away. He would lift her, demonstrate the strength differential, and then slam her to the arena floor with enough controlled force to end the match without causing permanent damage. Professional, efficient, humiliating for her, vindicating for him. Keiko's expression suggested she had been waiting for exactly this position. "Hey," she said conversationally, her face remarkably calm for someone in a submission hold. "You know what's funny about shoulders?" Vexthar tightened his grip. "Your defeat is imminent, human. Accept it with dignity. They're balls," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. "Ball and socket joints. Great range of motion, terrible structural stability. Held in place mostly by muscles, ligaments, and hope." Before he could process what she was saying, Keiko moved. Not a dramatic technique, not some flashy martial arts demonstration, but a precise application of force based on a thorough understanding of leverage physics and anatomical weak points. Her right arm, still trapped in his upper left grip, suddenly rotated outward at an angle that looked wrong. She dropped her body weight, creating slack in his hold for a fraction of a second. Her left hand, freed by this movement, gripped his upper right arm just above the elbow. Then she pulled while simultaneously driving her shoulder into his chest, and the laws of physics did the rest. The Chrythani shoulder joint was remarkably similar to the human shoulder joint, which made sense from a convergent evolution standpoint but was deeply unfortunate for Vexthar in this specific moment. Ball and socket construction meant excellent mobility, but inherent vulnerability to the right kind of force application. Keiko had studied enough comparative anatomy to know exactly where the right kind of force needed to be applied. There was a sound like a mechanical joint failing catastrophically, because that was functionally what had just occurred. Vexthar's upper right shoulder separated, the ball of his humerus popping out of the socket with a kind of anatomical wrongness that made several audience members experience sympathetic nausea. The Chrythani champion's roar of pain echoed through the arena, a sound that bypassed the translator systems entirely and registered directly as something has gone terribly wrong. He released Keiko immediately, all 4 arms, well, 3 functional arms now, clutching at the dislocated joint. His scales, designed to protect against external threats, provided exactly 0 assistance against internal structural failure. Keiko stepped back, breathing slightly elevated but otherwise composed. She hadn't even worked up a proper sweat. The referee's holographic form flickered with what might have been shock. "Medical team to the arena floor. Immediate assistance required." The medical response was impressively fast, probably because they had experience with tournament injuries and maintained permanent standby positions. A team of mixed-species medical professionals swarmed onto the arena floor, their equipment humming with diagnostic energy. The lead physician, a collective medical specialist whose form looked like a floating collection of surgical instruments wrapped in concern, scanned Vexthar's shoulder with multiple devices simultaneously. Complete glenohumeral dislocation, significant ligament trauma, muscle tearing in the rotator structure. How did this occur? Vexthar, his pride now competing with his pain for dominance, gestured weakly toward Keiko. The human. I don't understand. Her mass is minimal. The leverage shouldn't have been sufficient. The physician's form shifted to what might have been academic interest. Fascinating. May I examine the human for comparison? Keiko shrugged, which several species present found remarkably casual given she had just dislocated the shoulder of a 4-time champion. Sure, I guess. The physician extended scanning equipment toward her, and the readings that came back caused several nearby medical staff to double-check their instruments for calibration errors. This is remarkable, the physician announced, apparently forgetting that this was supposed to be a private examination. The human skeletal structure is connected by an incredibly dense network of tendons and ligaments. The muscle attachment points are positioned for maximum leverage efficiency. The bone density is lower than Krythani standard, but the connective tissue is remarkably robust, and the grip strength readings are. And how is this possible with such minimal muscle mass? A junior medical tech who had apparently minored in xenobiology pulled up a reference file. Earth is classified as a high-danger death world. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a planet with extreme environmental variation. They required precise motor control for tool use and weapon throwing, which necessitated unusually strong hands and flexible joints. The physician continued scanning, clearly fascinated. The shoulder joint has nearly 180 degrees of rotation. The spine can flex in multiple axes. The hip structure allows for bipedal locomotion with exceptional balance. This is not a weak species. This is a species optimized for endurance and precision rather than raw power. Vexthar, currently having his shoulder relocated in a process that involved significant pain and humiliation, processed this information with growing horror. You're saying humans are naturally capable of joint manipulation techniques. I'm saying, the physician corrected, that humans evolved on a planet that required them to be very, very good at holding on to things and moving in complex patterns. Their bodies are essentially biological tools, optimized for leverage and endurance. You underestimated her based on mass and raw strength, but those weren't the relevant metrics for this combat style. The crowd, which had been stunned into silence, suddenly erupted into chaotic noise. Betting pools were being recalculated. Sports analysts were frantically revising their tier lists. Several species representatives were pulling up Earth's files and realizing that maybe they should have read past the part about primitive projectile weapons and noticed the sections about pursuit predation and exceptional throwing accuracy. Keiko, standing calmly while medical equipment buzzed around her, looked like someone who had just finished a mildly interesting workout. Is he going to be okay? She asked, nodding toward Vexthar. The physician's form shifted to what might have been reassurance. Full recovery expected within a standard cycle. The injury is painful but not permanent, though his ego may require additional recovery time. Vexthar, his shoulder now relocated but his pride still very much dislocated, looked at Keiko with an expression that mixed respect, confusion, and the dawning realization that he had been a complete idiot. You knew exactly what you were doing from the beginning. I'm a xenobotanist, Keiko replied. We study biological structures and their functions. Anatomy is kind of my thing. Also, I have 3 older brothers who all wrestled competitively, so I learned joint locks in self-defense when I was 12. You defeated me with techniques learned in childhood. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds embarrassing for you. The referee, who had been conferring with tournament officials, flickered back to full visibility. Due to combatant Vexthar's medical disqualification, victory is awarded to combatant Keiko Reeves of Earth. She advances to the semifinals. The announcement triggered another wave of audience reaction. Half the crowd was cheering for the unexpected underdog victory. The other half was recalculating everything they thought they knew about galactic power hierarchies. Keiko waved awkwardly at the crowd, which seemed to find her lack of showmanship either endearing or further proof that humans were bizarre. She turned to leave the arena, apparently ready to return to her original purpose of studying waste recycling systems. A cluster of journalists mobbed her before she reached the exit gate, their recording equipment forming a constellation of invasive curiosity. "How do you feel about your victory?" one asked, the question rendered in 17 languages simultaneously. Keiko considered this. "Surprised I'm here. Mildly concerned about the liability waivers I signed. Hoping this doesn't interfere with my research schedule. Do you believe humans can dominate the interspecies martial tournaments? I believe humans can dislocate shoulders when given sufficient leverage and anatomical knowledge. Beyond that, I make no claims. What message do you have for species that may have underestimated Earth?" Keiko paused, and for a moment her expression shifted into something harder, the kind of look that suggested her species hadn't climbed to the top of their planet's food chain through pacifism. Maybe read the entire xenobiology file before making assumptions. "We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest. We don't have natural weapons or armor. But we're very, very good at figuring out how things work and then breaking them efficiently. Evolution on Earth didn't make us the biggest predators. It made us the most persistent, the most adaptable, and really, really good at throwing rocks. Everything else is just applied physics." The journalists loved this. The quotes would be circulating through Galactic media within the hour, probably with dramatic music and slow-motion replays of the shoulder dislocation that would make Vexthar wince for the rest of his life. Keiko finally extracted herself from the media scrum and made her way back to the civilian sections of the station. She had a report on fungal growth patterns in zero-gravity environments that needed finishing, and tournament celebrity was interfering with her actual work. Behind her, the arena buzzed with activity. Medical teams were still attending to Vexthar, who was receiving sympathy, pain medication, and a lot of concerned looks from his training staff. Betting organizations were processing unprecedented payout requests. Tournament officials were reviewing footage and trying to determine if joint locks should be regulated differently. And across the station, in diplomatic offices and species embassies and military strategy rooms, analysts were pulling up Earth's files and actually reading them this time. They discovered a planet where persistence hunters could track prey for days, where the dominant species had mastered fire and tools and complex language, where evolution had created beings that could sweat for thermal regulation, throw objects with terrifying accuracy, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to pattern match and problem solve. They found records of humans running ultra-marathons that would kill most species from exhaustion. They found documentation of human grip strength that seemed impossible for their muscle mass. They found notes about human spine flexibility, shoulder mobility, and hip structure that suggested a species built for complex, adaptable movement rather than specialized power. They found, in essence, exactly what Keiko had told them to look for, and they realized that maybe the soft scientists, with no natural weapons, were actually terrifying in ways that raw strength couldn't address. 3 cycles later, Earth received formal invitations to send representatives to the Galactic Defense Cooperation Summit, the Interspecies Athletic Regulations Committee, and the Coalition for Advanced Combat Techniques Exchange. Human martial arts instructors suddenly found themselves with job offers from species who wanted to learn about leverage, joint locks, and the concept of using an opponent's strength against them. Keiko finished her research on the station's waste recycling ecosystem, published a paper that was remarkably well received in xenobotany circles, and politely declined all offers to continue tournament participation. She had science to do, and breaking shoulders was just a hobby. Vexthar recovered fully, returned to competition, and won his next 3 matches with a notably different fighting style that involved significantly more caution around joint manipulation. When asked about his loss to the human, he gave the same answer every time. "I learned that strength without knowledge is just waiting to be defeated by someone who did their homework." The galaxy adjusted its understanding of humanity, moving them from the harmless scientist species category to the approach with respect, and maybe don't grab them without understanding the biomechanical consequences category. It wasn't fear, exactly, but it was definitely a recalibration. And somewhere in the station's botanical research wing, Keiko examined fungal samples under a microscope and smiled slightly, thinking about how satisfying it was when physics worked exactly as predicted, whether you were calculating plant growth rates or the force required to pop a ball joint out of its socket. The known galaxy had precisely 847 recognized sapient species, and every single one of them agreed on exactly one universal truth: physical strength determined worth. Except now they were beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, they had been measuring strength incorrectly all along, and the soft species with the gentle grip and flexible joints had been strong in ways they hadn't bothered to understand. Evolution, it turned out, was a remarkably creative problem solver, and humans were one of its more interesting solutions to the question of how to survive on a planet that was actively trying to kill you. The answer involved persistence, adaptability, pattern recognition, and yes, occasionally dislocating the shoulders of overconfident aliens who really should have read the manual before assuming weakness. But that was just biology. Nothing personal. Just physics, anatomy, and the eternal comedy of watching arrogance meet education at high velocity. The universe, as always, remained indifferent to individual pride but deeply committed to entertaining irony.